Welcome to an Odyssey in Mixology and to the final part of my segment on ginger. In this video, I'm going to compare these 8 common ginger liqueurs to finally determine which is the best overall. Now, if you haven't subscribed, then please do so. I'd really appreciate it. Enjoy. Despite the popularity of ginger cocktails like the penicillin and the Moscow Mule, ginger actually isn't that common of an ingredient. It's used in a smaller percentage of cocktails than other flavors with fewer available liqueurs. Now, this is generally true across the board. I mean, there really are a lot of ginger liqueurs on the market to choose from. Now, obviously, it would be extremely hard to do this comparison with all of the smaller boutique brands, but what I have in front of me are generally considered to be the most common ginger liqueurs on the market today. The ginger liqueurs I chose are from DeKuyper, Stirrings, Pataka, Barrows, Giffard, Domaine De Canton, the King's Ginger, and Fair. They range in price from $12 to $43, but you might see slightly different prices depending on where you're at. Now, even if there is a bit of variation, that's still a really wide range, and considering these are all replicating the same base flavor, it's pretty difficult to figure out which one you should get. At least I've always felt that way. So regardless of if you care about which is the best overall or just which is the best bang for your buck, how do distillers go from this to these? Well, surprisingly, it's actually a pretty simple process. Like most liqueurs made from fruits or peppers, these ginger liqueurs are created through a process called maceration. Maceration is a fancy word for a specific type of infusion where you grind, tear, or crush up a substance, in this case ginger, and then force it to infuse in a high-proof spirit over high heat or just an extended duration. When the spirit has retained enough ginger flavoring, the mixture is filtered, cut with water, and then mixed with sugar. The Barrows Intense Ginger Liqueur deviates slightly from this because instead of filtering, it gets strained through a press. This leaves more particulates in the bottle, which is why it has a cloudier look to it. This same process can be done at home for a variety of fruits, vegetables, and spirits. It's a lot of fun to play with custom infusions, but the quality definitely depends on what you're infusing, how long you're infusing it for, and obviously how much you put into it. Now, whilst the ginger liqueurs might share this process on a mass production scale, each of them is a little bit different. This chart shows a breakdown of what goes into making each of these ginger liqueurs. There's a lot of similar processes and ingredients, but each has something unique about it. Some of these are shown in green. The most impactful difference other than proof is going to be the additional flavors column. While some liqueurs are just made from alcohol, water, ginger, and sugar, others have more complexity that might or might not show up in the final taste. So obviously the chart doesn't translate the taste, but it's still helpful information. Now that I know what the differences are, it's time to try each of these side by side and see how they stack up next to each other. The first thing I'm going to do is pour a glass of each and take a look at the color. Usually for infusions, the more saturated the color, then the stronger the flavor is. There are plenty of exceptions to this though, and artificial coloring is always a bit sneaky. I color grade my footage, but for this shot, I'm using as neutral a color palette as possible. Of these liqueurs, the Stirrings is the darkest and the Pataka is the lightest. Whilst 7 of these range from clear white to clear yellow, the Barrows is unique in that it's cloudy. This means it has larger particulates, and that could give it more flavor. I'm going to start with the cheapest, and that means I'm going to kick this off with the DeKuyper at $13. Now, DeKuyper has a reputation for very cheap pricing and fairly hit or miss quality. Because of that assumed quality, I think they get unfairly judged at times, but realistically, you get what you pay for. It's almost impossible to buy a cheaper liqueur, and they have a ton of flavors in the lineup. They serve a purpose, and so whilst I don't have high hopes this will be the best, it could very well be good value. So, kind of going on that topic, the aroma is surprisingly nice, but extremely light. It's pleasant, but I think that's kind of because there's not a lot going on here. What is there, though, consists of a mostly natural ginger smell with just kind of hints of spiciness at the end. Taste-wise, the ginger is weak, but it's not artificial. It is very sweet. There's a bit of a honey taste in addition to the normal sugar. The ginger spiciness is there. It's very subtle. I wouldn't say it's non-existent, but it doesn't stick around. It's kind of a subtle bite in the flavor itself. I think unoffensive is the right word here. It tastes very almost silky. I would use this in a ginger pina colada any day, but never in a penicillin. Overall, it's simple and clean. It doesn't surprise me, but it doesn't necessarily need to. It's a pretty good baseline ginger liqueur. Next up is the Stirrings Ginger Liqueur, which comes in at $16, so it's very much still a budget bottle. Stirrings primarily creates syrups and cocktail mixers, but they do make a few liqueurs on the side. So the aroma is definitely more ginger forward than DeKuyper. It smells natural and almost candied. The proof is higher, so more of that ginger does come through. Taste-wise, the ginger is pretty powerful, actually. It's at a level I would expect a ginger liqueur to be at. It seems natural, but the candied aspect is a bit of a distraction. That being said, there's a good amount of ginger heat to this, and that does make up for the candied aspect. The sweetness is high, but it's not overbearing. When I think ginger, I think kind of bright and crisp flavoring. I don't get that here, but I don't think I'm supposed to. I mean, on the bottle it says, infused with ginger root for a warm and spicy finish. I kind of agree with that perfectly. It is warm, it's a little bit dark, it feels intentional, it doesn't feel like it's a negative to the ginger. It's just not the bright, crisp flavor that I would come to expect from a ginger liqueur. That being said, whereas I would use the DeKuyper as kind of like a ginger pina colada base, this would be my go-to for a whiskey-based drink or something that required a bit darker and higher heat from the ginger itself. Next up is the Pataka Ginger Liqueur. Now, Pataka is a brand that has based their company, logo, and mission around animal conservation, namely saving tigers through partnerships with NGOs. Now, that's awesome, and I'm really glad that some companies are doing this where they're giving, portions of their revenue or their profit to good causes. That being said, it only buys them a little bit of slack. So, unfortunately, the aroma here is just really lacking. This is tied for the highest proof at 70, so there's quite a bit of an alcohol sharpness along with very light ginger notes. There's also some kind of a lemony citrus aspect that, whilst weak, is almost at the same level as the ginger itself. Taste-wise, there's a bit of a chemical ginger flavor on the front end. It tastes a little old and dark, but whereas that darkness kind of worked for the Stirrings liqueur, it's not really a positive here, especially due to the ginger flavors and the higher alcohol sting. Now, regardless of the shortcomings on the ginger flavor itself, there is a bit of spice here. There's more heat than the DeKuyper, but still not as much as the Stirrings. Now, surprisingly, this bottle actually has the ingredients on it. It's made up of grain alcohol, 25% sugar, 1% ginger, ginger aroma, and water. I'm going to go ahead and assume that that chemical taste is that ginger aroma that they added, maybe to compensate for the lack of real ginger used during the infusion itself. Now, I also think the reason they left this at 70 proof is because diluting it down further, maybe towards the standard 50 proof, made the ginger flavor almost non-existent. It's just quite weak and sharp overall. So this is Barrows. It's a single product distillery that's family run and has scaled incredibly well over the last few years. They pride themselves on using hundreds of pounds of fresh raw ginger per batch, along with no additives or extra ingredients. In fact, the only ingredients in this bottle is cold pressed ginger, water, sugar, and alcohol. So the smell from the Barrows isn't super powerful, but it's bright and spicy ginger. It's very straightforward. It smells almost juice-like, kind of like a ginger shot you'd get at a fruit stand. The taste kind of follows that as well, so it's just bright and crisp ginger. It's almost sour despite the sugar content. I think that's kind of just due to the high ginger content itself. This liqueur has heat, and it's the most natural, bright ginger flavor out of the ones I've tried so far. It's also got zero complexity in it because it's literally just ginger, but it's ginger done correctly. Now, I think some of the complexity in the other liqueurs is to try to detract from some of the shortcomings on the ginger. With this one, it's just not needed. The ginger is the only flavor, and it's executed very, very well. Domaine De Canton is likely what people first think of when they hear ginger liqueur. The original liqueur is Chinese in origin, and it was a combination of honey, ginger, ginseng, vanilla, and brandy. It was discontinued in the late 1990s and then revived in France using a similar recipe. So the aroma is what I would consider to be the baseline for what I'd expect from a ginger liqueur. There's a bit of a citrus note, but the ginger isn't fighting with anything to be on top. That being said, the ginger isn't perfectly natural. It doesn't smell bright. I think the extra complexity is kind of coming into play here, where it's detracting from the ginger as a whole, whilst creating something a little bit new. That sugar sticks around. So overall, it's nice. The heat is there. I'd say the stirrings is probably hotter. The sugar is a bit too powerful by comparison, in my opinion. There's also a small amount of vanilla. The citrus is helpful in that it's a refreshing kind of crispness being brought into the not very crisp ginger aspects of it. There might be a small amount of darkness coming from the cognac. I don't really see it as a detraction or an elevation to the liqueur. I think this is still probably the quintessential ginger liqueur, but it's got a little bit of extra stuff going on in the background. This is Giffard's Ginger of the Andes liqueur. Of the ginger liqueurs I have, Giffard is the largest distributor by far. The distillery is known for producing good quality liqueurs at medium price points, and unlike some other distillers at the same price point, Giffard liqueurs are widely available and they have some really interesting flavors in their lineup. So the aroma here is almost silky. The ginger comes through without any negative notes, but it does lack a spice component. Instead of the spice or any sort of citrus component that I saw in some of the other bottles, I can clearly pick out vanilla. It smells like a bit of a darker vanilla note. I kind of get like a lollipop vanilla from it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does detract from the ginger in my opinion. Taste-wise, it's a similar story, but there's a bit more ginger heat, which is really good for the liqueur. The ginger flavor isn't overly strong, but it makes up for it partly by being bright. It's actually a bit overshadowed by the vanilla, which is extremely prominent for it being a supporting flavor. That being said, the combination of the ginger and the vanilla is quite smooth, even if, like the Domaine De Canton, it is a bit too sweet. The complexity makes this something a bit new, that whilst it is still obviously a ginger liqueur, it doesn't quite fit any of the ones I've tried so far. I'd say it's most closely related to the Domaine De Canton, but this one seems to have taken the vanilla aspects and just increased it tenfold. It's quite nice, but again, it's getting a bit away from a quintessential ginger liqueur. Like, you could call this a vanilla liqueur with ginger aspects, or you could call it a ginger liqueur with vanilla aspects. Both would be true. Now, the current version of the King's Ginger is inspired by a similar recipe from the early 1900s. Prior to that, the distiller Barry Brothers and Rudd can trace their roots back over 300 years. Although production of the King's Ginger was outsourced to DeKuyper between 2010 and 2019, the production was moved back to the United Kingdom, along with giving the brand a bit of a facelift in 2020. Prior to that, the liqueur had a different recipe that makes this current version just a little bit controversial. So the aroma here smells a bit thin compared to some of the previous ones, but it leans quite a bit more towards the spice side, and there's nothing else competing with the ginger. It gives a bit of a tingling sensation in my nose, but the ginger itself comes through really clearly. Whether or not it actually is, it tastes quite a bit less sweet than the others. It might actually have more sugar, but the spice is high, and that does a pretty good job of taking the emphasis away from the sweetness. There is just kind of hints of lemon peel on the edges. It's nice. It adds kind of a bit of a bitterness to it as well. The ginger is pretty neutral. It's just bright and crisp, even if it does kind of kick you in the face with strength a bit. The taste lingers, unlike a few of the previous ones. Most of that is the spice, but I can still taste the ginger as the spice starts to trail off. So overall, it's a pretty potent liqueur. Now, I think it's important to bring up that the pre-2020 version of this liqueur was 82 proof, and that some people's reactions to this new recipe is not that positive. They say this lower proof version is too sharp, overly spicy, and lacks some of the nice lemon flavors that the original had. I get that. And frankly, a full proof intense ginger liqueur with low sugar and high lemon sounds phenomenal. But haven't tried it, and I likely never will. So this new bottle is being compared to what I have in front of me, not from what it was previously. From that standpoint, this still doesn't taste as obviously sweet as some of the others up here. And frankly, to me, the spiciness is a positive. The lemon is subtle, and that kind of lets the ginger be front and center. So whilst you can make an argument that maybe as a liqueur, it's better if it was higher lemon, As far as being a ginger liqueur compared to the rest of these, it's kind of nice where it is. Fair Liqueurs and Spirits was created in 2009, and as the name suggests, they source their ingredients from fair trade locations globally. Almost get a white wine smell from this one. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so this is one of the higher proof liqueurs. As such, there's a bit of an alcohol sharpness there. You can just tell it's going to be there. It's more of a sour ginger smell that's quick to come and quick to fade. I don't get a resemblance to most of the other liqueurs. I'd say it's most similar to the Pataka, but the ginger is more forward. And it's just that white wine smell that's kind of permeating everything. They say they don't add additional flavors, but I swear there's a bit of citrus here. I'd say this actually tastes somewhat similar to the Pataka as well. This does taste somewhat dark and processed, which is why it reminds me of the Pataka, even though I'd still consider it pretty natural overall. But the ginger flavor is significantly stronger in this one, and the taste is quite a bit better. There's a bit of a heat, but not a lot, and similar to the smell, the ginger is just really quick to fade after you sip it. Whilst this does taste kind of on a similar sweetness level as the King's Ginger, as in quite a bit less than the others, the sweetness on this one does stick around longer. The last taste I get from this liqueur is sweetness. For the ranking, I care most about a natural and full ginger flavor. Complexity and other flavors aren't really a negative unless they take away from the ginger or the liqueur as a whole. In 8th place, I'm putting the Pataka Ginger Liqueur. Pataka is a weak flavored liqueur that suffers from high sugar, high proof, low flavor, and a couple different off notes. When talking budget bottles in the $10 to $20 range, there are better options out there. In 7th place, I'm putting the DeKuyper Ginger Liqueur. This liqueur is weak all around, but what flavor is there is pleasant and enjoyable. Realistically, you get what you pay for. Whilst they could have made this a top contender by doubling the price, it serves its purpose of being a good introductory ginger liqueur at an ultra-low price point. The next 3 spots are close, and an argument could be made that each liqueur deserves to be higher than the other 2. Still, in 6th place, I'm putting the Domaine De Canton. This is still the quintessential ginger liqueur, but the sweetness is so high that it detracts from the interesting complexity and nice ginger flavors. This isn't a big deal in a cocktail where you can reduce the sugar, but the ginger flavor was also a bit mediocre. In 5th place, I'm putting the Fair Ginger Liqueur. This is an interesting liqueur that is saved due to the lower sugar content and fullness of the ginger flavor. It can't go higher because some of that ginger flavor doesn't stack up against the others, and with this being the highest priced bottle, I would have expected a little bit more overall. In 4th place, I'm putting the Giffard Ginger of the Indies. Originally, I had this liqueur further down the list because the strong vanilla, complexity, and mediocre ginger was too far off the baseline. Ultimately, this is not a traditional ginger liqueur, but I enjoy it straight even if I can't quite express why. It's a bit finicky in cocktails, but I've created some really nice tropical drinks with it. It's a cool take on a ginger liqueur, and that sets it apart from the others. The 3rd place award goes to the Stirrings Ginger Liqueur. This liqueur deserves to be in this lofty place based on flavor alone, but the fact that this is another budget bottle really makes this the true winner of the grouping. This is a very well-balanced ginger liqueur that nails the natural warm ginger flavor and heat. The 2nd place award goes to the King's Ginger. This liqueur has intense ginger flavors and heat. The subtle complexity doesn't take away from the ginger, and instead it enhances small aspects of it. This is a quality liqueur regardless of how much or worse the previous version was in comparison. The winner overall is the Barrows Intense Ginger Liqueur. I see this as a perfect example of why fix something that isn't broken. By focusing on the quality of their process and simplifying their recipe, Barrows has created a ginger liqueur that's perpetually fresh, spicy, and full flavored. You could make your own ginger liqueur for less, but liqueurs exist due to the ease of using them. This is just about the best example of a natural potent liqueur that I can think of, and it's an absolutely great addition to my bar. The last thing I'm going to do here is overlay the prices on these bottles in their final ranking. When talking which one of these is the best bang for your buck, 2 immediately stand out. For the price point over $25, the Barrows is not just the best overall, but it's lower priced than some of the ones it beat to first place. It lacks complexity, but it's the purest form of ginger liqueur up here. For a price point under $25, the Stirrings is fantastic value at $16. It might not stand up to the top 2 liqueurs, but it beat out quite a few liqueurs that are twice, even 3 times its price. And from that standpoint, I'd say it's worth every penny and arguably should be priced a little bit higher than it currently is. That's it for my video comparing common ginger liqueurs, as well as my larger segment on using ginger and mixology. In the next standalone video, I'm going to check out how the same base whiskey changed between 0, 6, 10, and 15 years of barrel aging. Should be a fun video. If you haven't subscribed, then please do so, but above all else, thank you for watching. Cheers!